This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a nice cup of coffee or a cup of tea, and that you're raring to go for this very important session. We've been talking a lot about the future in terms of enlargement, in terms of the EU, but now we're talking about the future of the real future of farming, how it affects, farmers, and what the EU is doing to make sure that we don't have a kind of crisis of succession. We've been talking about accession. This is about succession, and about the new generation of younger farmers that are already, working the land in Europe, and the generations to come. I'm Eddie Wax, the politics reporter at Politico. I'm replacing my colleague Louise Guillot, who sadly couldn't be with us today. But I just want to kind of give a quick introduction to this topic and what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about diversity, inclusion in the farming sector, especially when it comes to kind of gender equality and younger farmers. Under the current Common Agricultural Policy, gender equality is actually listed among the strategic objectives that the EU is saying that it's trying to pursue. And it requires EU countries to give at least 3% of their direct payments budget towards young farmers in the form of income or investment. So that number was a number that was, very much negotiated. I'm sure one of our panelists will be able to tell us about that a bit later on. But it's 3% now of the budget, and 25% of the CAP's budget has to go to eco schemes, which is one of the greener kinds of practices. And I'm quite interested in finding out, is there a link between our younger farmers, just by virtue of being younger, are they more green necessarily? Are they more in tune with the Green Deal? We'll kind of get into that in a little bit as well. Before we kick off, I'd like to remind you to tweet about this session. You can tag @LivePolitico and use the hashtag #PoliticoAgriFood. And I do encourage you, I've got this iPad here, you can send me questions on the Swapcard app, and I will do my best to put them to the panelists in the next 30 minutes. So, directly next to me we have Harriet Bradley, who's the head of the CAP program and the food program at the Institute for European Environmental Policy, IEEP. Welcome.
Thank you.
We have welcome back to Mihail Dumitriu, Deputy DG at the DG Agri of the European Commission. And then also we have Peter Maidendorp, who is since June, the president of the European Council of Young Farmers, or SEDJA, as it's known. Maybe we could kick off with a discussion about, there was picking up on something in the last panel when they were talking about pesticides. One of the speakers, Johan, from the German Farmers Association, talked about, gave his reasons for why farmers are no longer, or why some people are turned away from farming. If there's a farmer and he has 2 sons, why don't they want to follow in the footsteps of their father and take up the family business? I mean, this is maybe a problem in your country as well, in the Netherlands, where young people maybe are not so keen to get their hands dirty or take on this pretty risky, economically tough business. What do you think are the main reasons why farmers are not kind of walking in the footsteps of their farming parents? Peter?
Well, thank you for the question. I think the initiative report on generational renewal in agriculture, which was voted by the Agricultural Committee last month, really maps out very well the different challenges for young farmers, being access to land, but also access to finance, rural areas, the livelihood in rural areas. It really gave an overall holistic view on why young farmers are not taking over farms anymore. I don't think we can point at one specific reason, but it's just a holistic approach which is missing. also the challenges, seeing the challenges ahead in the sustainable transition, we have a lot of at our hands at the moment. Moreover, young farmers are more highly educated than ever, which also means that there are a lot of other job opportunities.
They're too well educated, that's the problem. Is that what you're saying?
Well, or there is too little profitability
Right.
at farming at the moment.
So there are other options for them, but I mean, Michal, when people talk about generational renewal, this is the slogan, this is the term that is used. What it really means is making sure that there's a whole new generation of farmers waiting in the wings to take over from the current farmers, and the average age of farmers in Europe, where we are now in France, it's pretty old. I mean, it's looking pretty worrying. What is the Commission doing to address this problem, and should we be worried about it?
Yes, I think this is an issue. We take it very seriously. In this CAP reform, I think we have tried to boost and to provide more support in the sense, and to try to have a more holistic and combine, and not only the EU tools, but also to tell member states also to make more coherence with the national policy, because we know exactly what are the factors hindering installation of new farmers and young farmers, and we try to address them. So lack of access to land, access to capital, skills, but there is also other elements. We try to help, because when you start a new business, you need more money in the beginning. You need to invest. You need to get up to the level and to be able to run profitably your business. So we have done more on this. And you mentioned the 3%. I think the members say they have planned quite well. They went above the 3%. They combined the tools, the top up of the income support and the installation premia. Some of them, they also introduced the support with a more favorable rates for the investments. We have tried to provide more favorable treatment to them in terms of accessing working capital under the financial instruments. But there are other aspects, and I want to mention one here, and I'm speaking under the control of Peter. It is also the recognition by the society of the job they are doing. I think more and more we see a kind of a negative view that farmers, they are doing an excellent job. They are feeding all of us. They are producing and offering us such a wide range of food and high quality. Our farmers in Europe have probably the highest standard in the world, and they are the most engaged in the green and digital transition. So
you're saying there's criticism, that you're saying they're getting unfair criticism.
There is a growing criticism towards the farmers, toward the farming sector, but I think there should also be recognition of the hard job they are doing. I mean, if you are a young farmer, why you are going to this sector? I mean, we also have a gap in the income. And this is a general gap. We have 40% less than the other gain in other sectors. So this is why in the first panel we discussed about scrapping the direct support. I think we should reflect seriously when we talk about this, because we also talk about the just transition, and we also talk about economic sustainability and competitiveness. So if you cannot gain a life out of the farming, would you go in the farming? I think we cannot have a future of farming without farmers for the future. And indeed, I think we consider the farmers, the young farmers and the new farmers, because we have now introduced in the policy also not only support for the young farmers, but we want to allow new entrants, which may not fulfill the definition of the young, but they are still young in spirit and in capacity to operate.
Well. You've brought up a lot of different issues there. I mean, especially this idea about the perception of farmers, and I want to bring Harriet in here as well. But just as a side point, I mean, it's interesting that reminds me of this term that was coined in France, I think by an academic or someone who wrote a book about farming, about agri-bashing. It was called agri-bashing. This idea that farmers have there's a negative perception of farmers and what they're doing, especially in terms of animal welfare, which is a huge issue in France and many other countries as well, and about the sort of environmental kind of pollution and the use of nitrates and pesticides, and we can talk about that in the Netherlands as well. But Harriet, as someone working in the world of environment and agriculture, do you think that negative perception, do you think there is a negative perception, and do you think that if there is one, that is one of the factors that's contributing to maybe people being less keen to follow in the footsteps of the previous generation of farmers?
I mean, I'd say it's difficult to generalize. So I think that in some cases, yes, of course. In others, I think farmers probably have quite a good reputation, and people do understand the important role that they play, obviously, in producing food, feed, etc., and other materials. So I do think it differs. I think that there is more focus now on the role of agriculture, but not only agriculture, it's the whole food system. This is what we've been talking about, in the sustainability challenges that we face. And I think getting away from definitely blaming farmers or consumers or whoever it is for this issue, I think it's important, because what we need to look at is the fact that we do face existential challenges, and that it is in farmers' interest as a whole as well, and for long-term food security, to be dealing with biodiversity loss, to be adapting to climate change, to be building a more resilient system, and to be going into business models that are fit for the future as well. So I think that regardless of all these kind of questions around polarization, etc., I think that we really need to build bridges between different types of the stakeholders, different parts of the food chain, and think about the way forward and have a constructive dialogue.
Peter, your country, the Netherlands, has been, going through lots of interesting politics, agricultural politics over the last year. There's been the nitrogen crisis. There's been new parties, political parties popping up and promising, the world to farmers and defending farmers' interests. Do you, as the president of the Young Farmers Association across Europe, is that something that you talk about with your members? This kind of a negative perception of farming? Is that something which turns people away and puts people off joining the profession?
Well, there's a negative perception, but I might even take it further. The mental health of young farmers, I think, is a problem that has not been recognized enough. I think it's working quite hard on a lot of our members, but also sometimes myself as a young farmer. We see a lot of challenges coming, and I think we're talking too little on transition paths, how to deal with these challenges, basically enablers to give young farmers the tool to also hit the targets of the Green Deal and the Farm to Fork, hit the targets of nature and biodiversity goals. I think those things would already help quite a lot.
Yeah. So it's not just about access to land, having capital to invest to actually start a farm. It's also about having a sense of where you're going, direction of travel, a sort of path to and that's something that you think the Commission should be providing, or which part of should it be should it be the Dutch government? I mean, there is people saying for a long time now that there's no sort of vision for agriculture, for farmers in the Netherlands, but should it also be something that Brussels is providing?
Most certainly, I think agriculture begins in Brussels. Most policy begins in Brussels, and after all, we're in an internal market anyway. So I really hope that the European Commission is going to work on a vision for the future of agriculture, and I hope that the strategic dialogue, which has been announced by the President, Commissioner von der Leyen, really can contribute to this.
We'll get into that in a bit as well. I want to ask about that as well. Sorry, I cut you off, but I wanted. Did you want to finish your point?
No, okay. If we want to talk later about it, it's also fine.
Okay. No, I just wanted to carry on the question of you've talked about the pressures and the challenges and the mental health crises, and there has been well documented problems in places like the north of France, where farmers have been really struggling, coming under so many different kind of pressures, economic, environmental. The perception question as well comes in there as well. But do you think maybe conversely that younger farmers are actually in a better position to maybe take on this transition? I mean, you were telling me yesterday that you are the ones who are going to be doing this transition, whether we like it or not. I mean, you are the younger generation. You're going to be the ones who are going to have to implement these farm to fork targets, these pesticide reduction targets, these Green Deal climate laws. It's going to fall to you. So, but do you think your generation is actually more prepared for that maybe than your father's generation?
Well, I also sometimes have this discussion with my father to make it a bit more personal about like the targets of the Green Deal, and we have discussion on that. But actually, I'm the one who has to execute these targets for 2030 and 2050. My generation has to execute these targets, and that's also to take it a bit back cap, why we find it we wondered a lot why only 3% of the cap is dedicated to young farmers.
What percentage should it be?
We CGI opted for double the ambition, so from 2 to 4. But I think, considering that first of all, only 10% of farmers is a young farmer, and seeing that these are the farms that still will be there in 50 years, I think it's more than reasonable that we're investing in these farms specifically because they're the farms that are here to stay.
Yeah. Do you think, Harriet, when you're working on these topics, the future of the common agricultural policy, the Green Deal, and lots of different ways to make agriculture more green and environmentally friendly, do you see that the younger generation is a bit more open, maybe more knowledgeable, maybe more enthusiastic than the older generation of farmers?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easier for the younger generation in a sense because they have grown up, I guess, also learning about the new challenges for the future that we face. And I think older generation of farmers, it's not really surprising if they've spent their whole career in a certain system and they're reaching the end of it, that it's difficult for them to think about change. So I think Peter's exactly right. We need to invest in the new generation and we need to put much more of the CAP funding into these kind of things. That needs to be combined, obviously, with sustainability as well. But I think another aspect is the gender diversity as well, which is one of the topic of these panels. I think it goes together, trying to bring more women, more diversity, more young people into the farming sector as well, is what we should be focusing on.
Is that obviously there's reasons to do that out of simple, there's obvious reasons to do that, but do you think as a side reason could also be, that maybe women are more open to farming in a different way rather than in the conventional kind of heavy industrial kind of way? Is there any truth in that?
There is some evidence of that, but I don't think it's automatic. So I think that other things need to happen as well at the same time. I think one of the things that has been coming up quite recently in a lot of debates is the advisory systems and also the educational systems that are open to farmers. And in a lot of cases at agricultural colleges, they're not teaching farmers the more sustainable approaches, regenerative agriculture, etc. So, whether you're a woman or a young farmer or whatever, you need access to that knowledge and that education. So I think that it's not going to be automatic that just because women start farming that it's going to become more sustainable. We need to change more kind of the paradigm, and that extends in a lot of different areas, including the education system.
So I suppose it's not just someone sitting on a floor of the Berlaymont who decides, right, we're going to start doing green agriculture. It needs to be from every little local school and local agriculture college. I mean, it has to start from there. But how can that happen? How do you foster a change in that way?
I mean, obviously it takes time, right? So we're talking about a transition that I think will happen over more than a decade. But when we talk about the climate targets and biodiversity targets, by 2050, we need to be reaching most of these goals, if not before. So yeah, it will, I think, take time. But we've also recently published a position on the next common agricultural policy, and that's talking about a big shift, redirection of the subsidies, and we are talking about away from these basic income support subsidies per hectare that are not targeted into things like transition support for farmers to take the risks that they need to move out of the current model, payments for public goods, support for advice and training, peer-to-peer learning, and also research and innovation. And I think if we focus the subsidies on these and on targeted things, then actually we can achieve a lot because it's a lot of money that's available at the end of the day.
Where do young farmers, I mean, there's one friend of mine who went and decided to leave London and go to Italy and buy an old kind of crumbling farmhouse, but he needed a lot of money, a lot of injection of capital to make that happen, and that, he was very lucky and he managed to get it. And being British, it's a separate question, it's not about the EU, but Peter, I mean, if there are young people watching this and young farmers, who are worried and they're seeing all these massive objectives and massive targets in which they don't feel they could possibly do, and maybe they haven't got any land, or maybe their father is farming in a very kind of, or mother or family is farming in a very conventional way with lots of heavy pesticides. Would you encourage people still to become farmers at the moment? Is that something which is an easy sell? Do you see that as part of your job even to be trying to get people to join up and be farmers, or is it not really your role?
I see it as part of my job to, together with business, society, and also the value chain, to create the preconditions which make it possible for young farmers to still join the sector. And that's where what we're really focusing on. Young farmers want to take their business to the next level. They want to improve their business with, on the other hand, the value chain behind it, and sustainability. And I think we should work on these preconditions. Young farmers want to have a grip on their future. They want to influence the policy that decides their future. And I think it's very important on the farm level, when we're talking about the sustainability targets, that on the management level, first of all, farmer knows what its goals are, then what is the current state of affairs, what is the benchmarking, then what is the goal of this year, and what do I as an individual farmer receive from getting these targets, what are the things we get out of reaching these targets. And I think if we manage to do that already, it helps a lot of young people through this transition, and also create clarity and better vision on which way to go.
One of the impediments, or one of the reasons why maybe we don't have an agricultural policy which is massively geared towards younger farmers, it might be because of the people who are making the policies. I mean, do you think that in Brussels there are enough? Yeah, you're still very young, Michal. I'm not trying to make any comments on that, but apart from yourself, are there other younger, policymakers or female policymakers? I mean, did we have a female agriculture commissioner about 2 decades ago? I mean, there hasn't been one while I've been in Brussels over the last 5 years. I don't see many female agriculture ministers around the Agri-Fish Council. Is there a gender imbalance in agricultural policy making itself?
Well, I think there is a gender imbalance in farming and in the business. I don't know if there is a correspondent also in the administration, in the policy making. I know that some member states, they have a very gender balanced policy, like in Spain, they are trying to have equal participation in the decision making. And I think also in their strategic plan, I think Spain and a few other member states, they pay a particular attention to the gender equality and incentivizing women and young people. But it's not only about the farming, because I wanted to say farming is not only a profession, it's a way of life, living. And sometimes, when you decide to take up a farm, you decide to do a particular style of living, you move into the rural area. And we have a general problem with the rural area because of the aging, because of the population, because of this there are the consequences. So access to basic services. So these people, they also want to have the equal opportunities like people living in the towns.
Yeah, so why would young people move to a village where the average age is 75 or something? And,
well, some of them, they move just because they believe and they like to move, to have a life more in the nature. And to stay there and grow their children in the much more natural, green environment. But we are also, because we are talking about the vision, we have put forward a vision for the rural area in general. So we should not forget the common agriculture policy is not only about the farming, it's also about the rural economy.
But it's where the money is. And there's no money in the long-term vision for rural areas.
Yeah, but the money is in the CAP, in the cohesion policies, in the national policies, and we are trying to put all this together and to have a kind of a coherent and have a kind of a partnership and at all levels, European, national, regional, local, and make this focus and attention to the rural area, because these are very important. And you cannot guarantee the future of the farming and the farmers for the future if you do not provide basic services. I mean, all the young farmers and new farmers, they would like to use modern technology. We are all trying to incentivize this green and digital transition, but digital, you need to have, first of all, the broadband there. If you don't have it, forget about it. So this is another objective we are following very closely at the European level, and we are trying to use and to mobilize all these instruments we have in hands to provide these services. Sometimes it's not easy. I mean, it is also, many of these services depends on the density of the population.
Yeah,
So
it's
you
all
have to
about,
find
whether doctors are available or schools for young kids or bus services or all the sorts of things. I just want to encourage people, we've got about 10 minutes left, definitely do, send in your questions and we can fit them in, I hope. I haven't had any for this panel yet, so I really do encourage you to, oh wait, actually maybe I was looking at the wrong screen. Oh, that's pretty fun. No, I don't think I am. I think I'm on the right screen, but do send in your questions. And you touched on that earlier, Peter. I mean, what Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President, mentioned in her State of the Union speech, where she announced this kind of strategic dialogue for agriculture. And she also called for more dialogue and less polarization. What did you think? What did you feel or think when you heard that? Is it just words, or is it a welcome, change in the discourse?
Well, to start, I think it's a missed opportunity that we didn't have this at the beginning of the mandate when the Farm to Fork was published, that we also had talks with the sector, but also other organizations about, okay, how we're going actually to reach these targets, and what are the transition paths. We're happy to see that agriculture is back at the discussion again. CJ has always been very committed to dialogue. It has been a very important part of our position paper making process. We tend to invite all different actors, always also to our working group. Most vital for this process is going to be the methodology, and especially which principles are going to be upheld within this methodology. In our opinion, there should be first equality on the table. All actors should be equal. There shouldn't be one actor that's above the other. Secondly, very important, there should be a clear mandate from all parties and actors on the table, but also specifically from the Commission. This also prevents that this turns out to just be a campaign rhetoric. And thirdly, we think it's very important that it's not about the day-to-day business. It should not just be about the CAP. It should be about the future of the agricultural transition and what are the enablers and what are the preconditions, as I mentioned, going to be for this sector in the coming 20 years.
Yeah. Let me ask Michal a bit more. Can you flesh out this proposal, this suggestion by the Commission President, your boss? Can you tell us a bit more? How's it going to work? When will it start? Who's going to be involved? Is it just going to be about talking to farmers, or will there be environmental NGOs and think tanks involved?
First of all, I think I was very interested to listen to Peter what the expectations are, and we are going to factor these elements in. We are working now very seriously on this proposal of the President, and we try to structure this process. So we have to establish the levels. Certainly there will be political, there will be technical, there will be citizens part.
Like citizens panels? Will they be like citizens panels like they had in France?
We are thinking about, we are just putting now and try to structure this. I cannot give you, because there was no...
Give us a little bit, give us a little taste.
But we are working on this and trying to structure, first of all, to set up the structure. Of course, it has to be validated. We try to see the calendar, and we try also to see the content. And of course, we do not want to be a kind of business as usual. We want to really to be a very focused exercise. And in this exercise, of course, we will have a particular focus because the President called for less polarization. So we have to look to the factors that lead to polarization and try to bring them together, because this is the purpose.
So getting Greenpeace and Copa-Cogeca in the room together and then just letting them fight.
Well, I think we do this since a long time. We have a permanent structural dialogue with all the stakeholders involved.
Okay, so how will it be different then?
But it's not this business, because this business continues to go on. But I think it's a kind of a separate structural dialogue. And of course, we are now looking to all the possibilities we have to do it. And
is the aim to finish it before the June the 6th next year, when the elections happen?
Well, I think expectations are that this dialogue is done now, quickly, and this period. So it is the proposal of this college. So I think this is what we consider. But I told you, we are working on it.
Yeah.
It's not a...
Maybe you'll think of a different name rather than strategic dialogue. Because I don't know how that's going to, I don't know how interesting that is for your average EU citizen. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? How do you think this should run, Harriet?
Well, firstly, we're happy to see this announcement, and we do think that it's something needed. We've identified challenge, I think, similar to what Peter was talking about, that we do talk about transition, but I think in general there's not a kind of consensus around what that transition entails and involves. And I think the Farm to Fork and the European Green Deal set some of the direction on the sustainability, but there are areas where I think we see things not adding up. I think from a land use perspective is one example. So we've got all these different targets for obviously still continuing to produce food and the needs that we need on the production side, but then we've also got carbon sequestration targets, we've got biomethane targets, we've got nature restoration targets now. So I think if you really look at what these require, it's a lot more demand for land. And if we're also going to start producing a lot more materials from bio-based, that's also more demand for land and forestry products. So what we were saying as well is that we do need this grand débat amongst society. What do we want to achieve, and what demands do we want what do we want to achieve in terms of what we get from land, and what different uses we put it to, and making sure that those targets add up, because they don't necessarily. So I think just that will be really important. And I think then, again, on the consumption side, it's something that the Farm to Fork didn't go into enough, because if you look at the science, if you really want to achieve food security and also protect the environment and meet the climate goals, etc., you are going to have to address consumption. That's the only way to do it. And this involves tackling the difficult issues like the level of livestock consumption that we have in the EU, etc.
So eating meat and milk.
Yeah, so I think the strategic dialogue has to take into account land use, it has to take into account food production, it has to take into account consumption side, and it has to take into account public health and animal welfare. So there's a lot of different issues.
Okay. And it's got to start now, so better get on with it.
Yeah, and it has to happen before the next CAP well in advance, so it can inform those.
And they've got to reform the CAP or get cracking on the political dimensions, as Dacian Cioloș told us earlier. So the Commission's got a lot of work to do. We've got 3 minutes left. I just wanted to kind of sketch out a vision of what will a young farmer look like, in 30 years, or if we're thinking about 2050. At the moment, this is provided that there is enough young farmers to take over, because I'm just reading here in my notes that a quarter of farmers in the EU will retire within the next decade, which is a rather worrying statistic. But you have a farm in Groningen, and you're producing potatoes and sugar beets and hemp and all sorts of things like that. How could you imagine that you will be farming? I want to know about, will you be using pesticides? Will you be having lots of high-tech, satellite imagery? Will you be using fertilizers? I mean, you don't have animals, so maybe not anyway, but tell us a bit more about how you imagine the practice of farming in 30 years' time.
Well, I think there are...
Oh, I was going to ask Peter about that,
okay.
But I'll come to you straight after, Michal.
Well, in 10 years, I hope to fully have taken over the farm. And as you said, the reduction of pesticides is something, it's already a trend, but it will most certainly go much faster also with new technologies already. But I most certainly hope that I'm not alone in this transition, that society and the value chain behind me can offer me a framework in which I know which direction of sustainability I should invest in. Because the worst thing that could happen in my vision is that I invest in sustainability that in the end doesn't work or is the wrong side of sustainability. And I think we should work on, as a society, on which way we want to go, what are the transition paths, and which definition of sustainability we're going to uphold, which is also going to work together with the value chain and other actors.
Okay. Michal, you wanted to give us a vision of the farmer, the typical EU farmer in 2050?
Well, I think for me it will be a bit difficult to say how I envisage this, but I think there is a general consensus that we need more sustainable farms, and they need to survive because of the climate change. And we all accept that we have to go through this transition. So I think the question is how to run this transition. And then I think certainly there are a lot of new solutions now, and the policy should come and support this. I mean, when we're talking about the new technologies and the innovation and developments, I think this is here. There is also a speed up in uptake of these new technologies, which will come to help the farmers. But then they need new skills, and they need support to use them. Some of them may be costly. So this is why we have to look into the policy instruments to try to support the process.
Okay. Harriet, do you want to have a final word on I'm still waiting for an answer which satisfies me entirely. I want to know about what technology the farmer's using. I want to know, how big the farm will be, to give us your ideal 2050 farmer.
Well, I think there will be huge developments in research and innovation, and obviously we want to push them in the direction of ambitious sustainability performance. But I think that there has to be a range of different farms, and we accept that there will be some, there will be a spectrum. There will be some who are going down a more kind of high-tech route, but obviously with sustainable technologies. And then there will also be more small-scale agroecological. So I think Europe is very diverse in terms of its farming system, and that's fine. It's just that we need to move the spectrum to a sustainable place that's within planetary boundaries. But within that, there are a lot of different models, and we also need areas where they're highly productive as well, because we need to meet the need to produce food. So I think accepting a range of different models, but within kind of ones that are within the local and the global planetary boundaries.
Got it. Great. Well, we've really had a whistle-stop tour of the different, issues facing young farmers, and we've kind of sketched out a view of how, farming could look and how farming should change. And we also kind of delved a bit into what the Commission's doing now and the demands on the Commission to start various dialogues and make sure that this strategic dialogue, which has been announced, is wrapped up soon and is inclusive. We talked a bit about whether young farmers are more kind of prepared than the old generation to actually take on this transition, which is it gives me a bit of relief. I mean, it's good that they're coming up, behind us. But we also kind of delved into the question of who's setting the policy. Is there enough gender balance in the policy among the policymakers, or not just about gender, but also about the generational gap. So we've really kind of talked about the whole gamut, I think, of generational farming and gender topics in farming. Of course, there'll be a lot more to say. But I just wanted to say thank you to our speakers. And before we give them a round of applause, I want to ask you please to remain seated, because in just a few minutes, my colleague Bartosz will be moderating a panel on innovation, something we've been talking about just now, and asking whether it's the answer to greener agriculture. And thank you very much to our three panelists.